Hi, this is the best video game panel, which is about not the best video game in general, but the best video in the Hugos, because the Hugos Discon 3, which is the 2021 Worldcon, has announced a special category for best video game because everybody played such a lot of video games in lockdown. And I mean, I made a lot of sourdough bread in lockdown, but there's not a best Hugo for that, is there? So there are 6 games nominated or 6 games on the finalists. We have a panel and we are going to talk a bit about, first of all, those games insofar as we can. We are also going to talk a bit about the best video game Hugo and whether that, threat or best video game Hugo, threat or menace. And and we're not properly moderated, so we're just going to be immoderate. So if one of us goes off on one, please tell us to stop in the comments. This panel is being recorded, and I think it's being recorded forever. Actually, I'm not sure, but we'll sort out afterwards exactly where it will be. If you would like to be on the panel and you have played The Last of Us Part 2 or Final Fantasy VII Remake, as in the games that are actually nominated, do say, and we will promote you. Otherwise, do your normal thing of issuing comments, not questions, and we'll pick them up later. I'm Alison Scott. I am joined by Emily, January and John Coxon. And my authority for being on this panel is A, I wanted to be on the panel, and I thought the panel was a good idea. And I am very interested in this. And B, I have been organising the Hugo Voter Packet, in which you can get free copies of Hades and Spiritfarer if you are a Discon 3 member and have not played them before. Ask me how. Yeah, Emily, do you want to say a few words?
Hi, I'm Emily January. My pronouns are she, her. And yes, I was excited to be on this panel because I have played 3 of the games. And I've also I followed quite a lot of the critical discourse around Last of Us Part 2 and Final Fantasy VII Remake. And while I haven't played them, yeah, I find them very interesting. And I find the idea of, both this special Hugo and the campaign for a more permanent video game Hugo a really interesting subject. I have lots of thoughts on.
Hello, I'm John Coxon. Insofar as I relate to gaming, I am the nemesis of Mark Plummer of Croydon, in that I keep talking about games on a podcast he listens to. And I have played Spiritfarer, Hades, and Blaze Ball, or Blaze Ball, depending on your perspective. I've also played The Last of Us Part 1 and previous games in the Animal Crossing series. And I'm big into games. And one of my kind of key areas of interest here is not only the video games, but also the way in which the campaign for a game Hugo has been very broadly targeted at games in general, but the Hugo category we're talking about today is very geared towards video games. So that's one of the other kind of aspects I'm particularly interested in.
I should have said at the beginning, I have played a little bit of Spiritfarer, I've played a little bit of Blazeball, I've played quite a lot of Animal Crossing, and I have played a really unfortunate amount of Hades that has seriously interfered with my life for the last couple of months, and I blame the best video game Hugo. So I don't think we really talked about this in advance, but we could either talk about games and the Hugos in general first, and then go on to the specific games and then make some recommendations, or we could talk about the specific games first and then draw conclusions from that. And I was wondering what the panel would prefer.
I'd be inclined to talk about the specific games first, although we could do sort of a quick thing, but I think they give us a good basis for talking about the subject more generally.
I think that makes sense.
So I have a very first question for you two on this, which is, do you think that games given the Best Hugo Award for video game should have some genre content? And do you think that all of the nominated games do?
Oof, starting us off with a biggie. I mean, oh, Emily, you go first.
I don't I think they should. I think I don't know much about Spiritfarer. It certainly seems like it does. All the other ones, I think, have some level of genre content to different styles and extents. But I do think they should, which is maybe no. John?
So I have thoughts. So there's an argument here which goes back, I think, quite a while. So for instance, Apollo 13 was nominated for a Hugo. And there is a debate about whether or not Apollo 13 is science fiction. It is certainly fiction about science, but is science fiction as simple as that? And that is, I think, a very difficult thing to address that we may not be able to get into here. I think that it's relatively clear to me that especially, so the two PlayStation games are a zombie game and a science fiction game. Hades is squarely fantasy, and Spiritfarer is squarely fantasy. Animal Crossing, I think the genre aspects are basically that it does have cutesy animals, but then that opens up interesting. There's a ghost. I mean, Animal Crossing could arguably be in the same genre category as Eurovision's Story of Fire Saga, in that I think it makes me wonder whether stuff like Sesame Street is genre because it has animals in it that talk.
So
like, I don't know what I think there. That is a hard question.
I do know what I think there, which is that the best video game Hugo should have genre content and Animal Crossing doesn't. And the
words.
Yeah, no, I mean, let's be clear here. And
it has a ghost in it.
Yeah, okay.
It's very limited. That is the game I meant by, it's barely, but it does just about how.
Yeah, so it just about sneaks in, but it's not the genre is not critical to how you play the game or the experience that you have with it. And I think the genre is critical to some extent for all the others. Though Johnny has asked in chat, is Blaseball a game? And I think that is also a question. Are all 6 of the nominated video games? And Blaseball is a game in the same way as watching the England and Scotland game. When you watch the England and versus Scotland game, when you follow Euro 2020, are you engaged in a game activity when you do that?
Well, I would say it's like not Final Fantasy, fantasy football. It, I think fantasy football is a game. I think, like betting generally is a game. It's just not necessarily what we tend to think of in games, but I would put them in that sphere, and that's what the game is. And
this is something. I want to come in on something that Emily said. So I think, and this is something that Shut Up and Sit Down have talked about previously, which is that something that we in the category of people that talk about video games and board games tend to very often neglect is to talk about gambling. But gambling is probably the most lucrative game industry. Like certainly more lucrative than tabletop gaming. I mean, I know video gaming is massive now, but like I do think we have a tendency to forget that gambling is gaming, and Blaseball is a virtualization of that. Now, I confess, I think the reason Blaseball, really want to pronounce it Blaseball. The reason it's nominated, but the reason it's been nominated, I don't think, is for the gameplay. I think it's for the emergent narrative that the gameplay enables. But then that is also very difficult because I think that I don't think that is an unfair. If a game drives an emergent narrative or a ludo narrative, I don't think that's an unfair reason to say it is a good game.
I would say actually that's one of the things that video games can do. That is one of the reasons you might say it's worthy of there being a Hugo, because it can do interesting things like this emergent narrative and this thing that doesn't just exist within the game itself, but exists more widely, pushed by the game. And actually, I do think as well, it's important to consider sort of idle browser games. I don't know if either of you are especially familiar with them, but I mean, what the point of idle browser games is that a lot of the time you can just leave it ticking over. A cookie clicker is one of the most well-known ones. There are some others. I spent a long time with cookie clicker as my sort of thing. I could, my work distraction, where it was impossible for me to spend very long distracting myself at work with it, because the point is you do a little bit, go away, come back. And Blazeball is in that genre of game. And because it's an idle game, for a lot of people that might feel, well, is that a game? Because you're not so active.
I would also say with Blazeball, because I think it's probably Blazeball rather than Blase Ball or Blazeball, but who knows? Blazeball like baseball. When I was exploring how you might play the game, I did spend some time on the Blazeball Discord, and I found myself, I got into my team of the core mechanics, which should not surprise anyone who knows me. And
I'm a jazz hands, which is equally unsurprising.
And I got into the core mechanics Discord, and what I discovered was a lot of people, it was in the off season at the time, but a lot of people discussing how they could act communally to manipulate the post-season activity. And at that point, those people were definitely playing the game. So as well as the emergent ludonarrative for Blazeball, for people who in the audience are not familiar and haven't played with it, it's a very simple baseball betting game, except that all of the things that happen in it are completely surreal. If you've listened to the podcast, Welcome to Night Vale, the environment feels like that. It is often mentioned in the context of Blazeball. So rather than do the sports, so what you get is the kind of convergence of extreme sports fans with extreme internet nerds who aren't really into sports generally. And this has created a huge outpouring of fan art, fan fiction, music, extreme statistical analysis, because as anyone who knows anything about baseball or cricket knows that you can't really, you only scratch the surface of those till you get the thing that's like Bertie so-and-so has scored, is the first person ever to score 492 runs in a thunderstorm, and this is absolutely the heart of what Blazeball does. I hate the game. It is everything I dislike about games. It is ludicrously open-ended. It is extremely non-obvious what you have to do. I mean, I hugely admire it as a concept, but oh goodness, so not my thing. I just want to be told go and fight the big boss, and then fight him again. But it's a very valuable thing that I personally don't enjoy. But,
Yeah, I bounced off the game itself. I played it for a bit and I enjoyed it. I think the thing that I struggled with is that actually it's not ongoing always the same thing. So, to really get the most out of it, you need to pay attention to when the off season is, when it isn't. And I think because, basically they have, when it's the on season, there's a game and there's a set of games an hour, and you can bet every hour on those games and then buy other things to get more money in the meantime. And then there's the off season, which is, time to take a break. And also there's various ways people can influence it then. But I was just like, oh, it's the off season. Well, I'll try and come back when it's games again. But having to keep track of that didn't work for me for actually what I wanted it as a very idle browser game. It wasn't engaging. It wasn't sort of, I couldn't always go back to it. But I find it very interesting. I watched before I played it. Quins from Shut Up and Sit Down does the weekly Blazeball roundup, which is an in-universe, following the narrative. And I find that interesting, even as I can't follow it at all. But as a game, it wasn't one that I was very into.
Yeah, I mean, I really respect what it's doing in the emerging narrative, and I think I'm very glad it's on the ballot for exactly that reason, because I think I think that it is clearly doing something that not many games succeed at doing, and I do think that is worthy of the community recognizing it as a finalist. I suspect it won't win. I will be very curious to see the stats for the voting when the voting comes out, to see like who put it where. But yeah, like watching the YouTube videos brings me so much joy. Like watching Quinn's try and explain to people who don't know what Blazeball is, what was actually happening, and it's just so good, and it makes me laugh so much. And it kind of reminds me most. It's the video game I've interacted with the most that reminds me of trying to talk to people who play role-playing games about how their role-playing games are going, because they say things and you're like, that doesn't make sense. All the nouns and verbs you've used are fine, but the order you've used them in is frankly distressing. And yeah, I respect it on that basis, certainly, but I also bounced off the actual gameplay.
Yeah.
So one of the other things in the Hugo packet is trailers and supporting information for games you might not have played, in case you have not played, as none of the panel have, we're sorry. The Last of Us Part 2 and
Final Fantasy.
And I watched these trailers and Final Fantasy VII Remake. So the first thing is that my hairdresser explained to me how Final Fantasy VII, the first one, was a life-changing game that was incredibly important to him. And I wonder whether that is true for quite a lot of it. People, and those people may have nominated Final Fantasy Part 2. The trailer of it was like, oh no. Oh, people will talk at me at length about stuff I don't care about. They cannot even make the trailer interesting. And The Last of Us Part 2, the trailer for me was like, oh no, I have to go and shoot people in the head. I am not going to do that. It's funny because I'm really up for whacking at people with a giant sword or even a machine gun, as long as it's set in ancient Greece. I don't know why that is. Just bear with me. But I'm not going to sneak up on somebody whilst avoiding them spotting me and then shoot them in the head. I am never going to play a game that makes me do that. So that was, so I really could, if I saw these trailers in the wild and someone was like, you might want to play these games, for both of those games, I'd go, oh no. But I get that people like them. So John, you've played Last of Us Part 1.
Yeah, I think there's and because at the beginning we said, or someone said something along the lines of, oh, these aren't videos, these aren't movies, these aren't books, these are video games. And The Last of Us is probably the game on the list that challenges that viewpoint the most, in that it is really a movie where you occasionally have to push forward on a joystick. Now, that might seem a bit harsh, so let me dive into it a little bit. The studio that make the Last of Us games is the same studio that made the Uncharted games, which are all PlayStation exclusives. So if you don't have a PlayStation, you may not have played them. And they're also the same company that used to make Crash Bandicoot, a company called Naughty Dog. Now, the Uncharted games are very well made, but they are extremely linear. They are telling a story, and you don't really have any agency at all in how that story unfolds. The main agency you have is in exactly what order you kill the baddies you are confronted with, because even in terms of the puzzles, there is one route through each of the puzzles, so you are doing it in exactly the way the game's designer intended. I don't know how puzzle focused the Last of Us games are compared to the Uncharted games. It might be that the puzzle focus decreases. I'm not sure. But I think the thing, and part of the reason I bounced off Last of Us Part 1, and I don't really fancy Last of Us Part 2, is because I enjoyed that formula the first time I sat down to it, because it felt super fresh, and I was like, oh wow, this really immersive story, yeah. And then I played the other Uncharted games, I was like, but he's making decisions I fundamentally don't agree with. Like I'm playing through set pieces and I'm like, I would not have done this. This is daft. And I really dislike games that make you that try and make you really identify with the main character and then make you do stuff and you're just like, but why am I doing this? And this is also why I dislike Red Dead Redemption 2, which I know is an unpopular viewpoint, but the main character is just such a dick.
I would
Emily.
Yeah. So one of the things I really heard with The Last of Us Part 2 is even, people who play games all the time, people who play video games for a living, play lots of all sorts of games where you kill people, said that it was spectacularly violent and grim, and like partially also the level of realism in it, and therefore you have people begging for their lives while you have to kill them to progress the game and things like that. And it is, and the story, there's lots of aspects of the story I find interesting, but even people who said there's lots of good here, I heard so many, and loads of people just loved it completely. The level of violence and death, and also very realistic voice, the voice acting and the graphics and so on, were such that it's a lot to play. And one of the things that's interesting with that one, and it's something people argue about a lot of the Hugos, a lot of sequels are nominated and people feel differently about that. This game is definitely a sequel. The story takes up from the end of the first one. It is, the second part very much following a plot that is based on, you need to know what happened in the first one. And then Final Fantasy VII Remake doesn't remake the entire game, so it's therefore not like they're going to do another one, and it in itself is not necessarily, I think it might be, people might consider it a whole game if it wasn't a remake of something else where it only covers about half of it, or some proportion of it. And yeah, Final Fantasy VII in particular is the Final Fantasy that everyone talks about as being the most amazing, and it's not a straightforward remake. It's not a we've just done up the graphics. It changes some elements of the story. It is in itself its own thing that is based in the idea of Final Fantasy VII, but significantly changes some elements. But it is in itself, a lot of people, especially when they didn't know that going in playing, were quite disappointed in that ending that wasn't the full end of the story. So that two different aspects of not necessarily a complete standalone game with the two PlayStation ones.
No, and I very much get the impression that Final Fantasy VII is the PlayStation generation's equivalent of Ocarina of Time for us N64 people. But Ocarina of Time has been re-released so many times that there's no problem. Like, I don't feel like I need the remaster at the moment.
But
I think it's very interesting that Final Fantasy Remake, and people are like, well, it's not exactly the same as the original. And anyone who has ever played a Nintendo game has had the experience of rebuying that same game on multiple consoles with minor changes in order so that they can sell it to you again. And I'm not sure whether the Final Fantasy VII Remake does significantly more than that.
Yes, it does. It is a lot more significant. It changes major story beats and plot elements. And some people were very, I had one friend who was a Final Fantasy VII obsessive, who was just like, there's no way I'm going to play this. And then she did play it, she loved it, but she had to let go of the idea that it was exactly the same story, even, not the gameplay or other things, but the story is somewhat, it is changed to an extent.
So I've played,
So sorry, I was just going to pick up on something that Emily said and link something that Rita said in the chat, which is that talking about the kind of modifications to Final Fantasy VII in terms of the fanish reaction to the original game, and that's actually, I haven't really considered that, but I guess when you're remaking a game like that, you are going to bear in mind how the fandom relates to it as you do that. But is it kind of interesting to think that the remake is in dialogue with the original game? Like, because that means if you are coming to it because you want to play the original game and you missed out in like the 90s, do you miss out on part of what makes the remake good? I don't know.
There are ways to play the original game, now. And I think, I'm not sure, there might even be some sort of more legit ways to do so. But, this is a modern 2020 AAA game in itself, which is, Final Fantasy have released lots of, it's so strange you can now play Final Fantasy games on the Switch, but those are the ones where it's just a slight, making it so you can play it modern times.
Yeah.
I am wondering, because I've seen some discussion about, you have to consider it across all of the games and movies, and it would be hard to have a single story. And I am wondering whether what we are seeing is Final Fantasy emerging as the sort of multi-tentacled IP product like Star Wars or the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where very large companies could essentially make infinite money by spinning off different things in this space.
I'm just glad that Nintendo haven't done that with Zelda.
I'm slightly surprised they haven't, because I'd be up for the Zelda movie as long as it was done well. And
did you see the Super Mario Brothers movie, Alison?
Okay,
so I did.
Right, so this is definitely not on topic for this panel, but there has only been one video game movie ever made, and that is Minesweeper the trailer.
100% true.
Yes. So somebody else who's not me can put a link in the chat to that, so you can go and watch it. But they could be. You could make a good movie out of video games.
Yeah.
And when you look at these games that are narrative, is Final Fantasy very narrative, Emily?
Yes, they're pretty narrative. There's a lot of go and find things, or this side quest where you ride a chocobo or whatever, but it's not narrative in the way the MCU is, where there's a level of incoherence in the MCU, but things tie together a lot more. Most Final Fantasy games you can play having not played the other ones. Frequently, completely new characters, maybe some cameos. Sometimes the settings feel almost unrecognizable as being related to the settings of another Final Fantasy game. So it's somewhere in between. But it's not necessarily so, like, you don't need to know the plot of Final Fantasy VI to play Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy 14 is an MMO, and then Final Fantasy 15 is, so very unrelated, different thing, requires no knowledge of that MMO.
So I just want to flag up two things, which is firstly, someone in the chat, I think it might have been Ruth, pointed out that you can buy Final Fantasy VII on Steam, the original version. You can also buy it on the Switch, and it's currently £6.40. So I'm probably going to do that because
I thought that was
might be good.
Yeah.
Secondly, you can also, I believe, if you have a PlayStation more modern, download a demo of the first bit of the remake. So if you are considering voting for this category in the Hugos and you don't want to shell out, I think the game's 60 quid, it might even be more than that, but it's not a cheap game. But if you want to get a taste for it, see whether it's your cup of tea, I believe there is a demo for you to play. And if you want to see what The Last of Us Part 2 is like, there's a demo called The Last of Us Part 1, which might be a bit cheaper.
Yeah.
That's a bit unfair.
We should probably move on to the...
I was going to say a little bit about Animal Crossing, because as I said, I don't think that the...
Turnips, that's all I know.
Turnips does have... So it's interesting you were talking about betting, because one of the most compelling parts of Animal Crossing was introducing the notion of...
the stock market.
Bubble speculation to prepubescent children who might not previously have been aware of it. And I feel like that wasn't necessarily an unadulterated good. especially because it was in a market. The Financial Times did an excellent when Nintendo they nerfed the turnip market. And when they did that, the Financial Times wrote an article about why the turnip market had been nerfed and the economics of Animal Crossing. And it wasn't even April Fool's. It was a fantastic play by the FT, actually taking some interest in virtual marketplaces. I played it, but I played it primarily because we were talking earlier about lockdown board gaming and gaming with your family in the pandemic. And I played Animal Crossing because I was playing with my children who are adults. So there's not a good word for your adult offspring, but my adult offspring were playing it with me, and we were sharing an island and building things on it. And it was all very, family. It was a good family thing to do together. But then I quickly lost interest because, oh God, how many turnips can you sell for money? Who really cares what their kitchen looks like?
I got very into Animal Crossing for about 2 months.
That was about right, about 2 months. I played it every day for 2 months.
But I wasn't working, and I was playing it very intensely, and I was also sort of, you can watch online and things, and then find people whose island you can go and visit in order to. So I got all of the. So in order to build, you get resources, you build things. To build different things, you need the instructions. So I got the instructions for all of the different nighttime things, because if you have a certain person who comes sometimes, she will give you a new set of instructions. Mm-hmm. So I would go every night to a different island to get a set of instructions, and I had every instrument in the game in every color. And so I was sort of going very full on it in a, I like to collect everything. I like to do that part. And I think if I were capable of sort of just going in for a bit each day and checking up my things and not doing some of them, then that would I might have continued playing. But because I find it very hard to do anything less than everything, when I stopped playing hard, because I didn't want, the idea of going back in, even just, to go and watch a firework display with friends and their thing, I think, but I would feel like I need to pick all my trees and plant these things and check up on all of the other elements, which, I think, some people, they still play it every day because they can just sort of pop in, or every month when new things turn up. And I never got that into the turnips as much. I did a little bit, but it was definitely communal, and that was one of my favorite parts of it. I was playing a lot with my sister and some friends, and I did really appreciate having that thing, especially when it was just such a weird time of just like, oh, hey, we could do this, and we'll chat on the phone while we visit each other's islands and give tours and show what new things we've built.
So, John, you've played previous Animal Crossings, but not this one.
Yeah, so I'm going to do that thing. I'm going to be the old white guy who's like, look, I don't understand any of this newfangled stuff, but I did play a game in mid-2000s, which I think is probably relevant, and therefore I'm going to consider myself an expert. But that, all of what you've just said really reminds me of my relationship with the N64 game, which is, the GameCube game, which was where I kind of encountered Animal Crossing previously, where I got super intensely into it, and I wanted to do all the things. I wanted to collect all the stuff. I had my basement in my house, so I'd make my house better. It was good. I made like t-shirt designs on my Game Boy, and then like you stop playing, and the next time you like load it up, like, and Ruth just said this in the chat, like every single character in town's like, oh, we haven't seen you for a while, and it's like, okay, and that just made me feel super like annoyed, and I was like, well, in that case, I'm just gonna stop. Like, I'm not going to play a game that tries to emotionally manipulate me into playing it all the time and gets annoyed with me when I don't.
So how do you feel about free-to-play games?
Well, this is, yes, but I mean, also annoyed. But no, this is something, my relationship to video games is very much like, I go through phases where I will play a game for like super intensely, and then I will stop for like months, and then I'll go back to that game and I'll play it super intensely. But if the game gets annoyed at me for playing it that way, that is a game that is probably not for me. And so I didn't buy Animal Crossing because I suspected that it would not fit in with the way I tend to relate to these things. But clearly very popular.
I think it does guilt trip you less than previous games in the series, but it still does some of that.
I know somebody who was severely traumatized by Rossetti, who is the character in Animal Crossing who gets angry at you they're doing it so that you don't scum save, but in practice what they do is shout at you for 5 minutes if your Nintendo DS ran out of charge. And I mean, that's not a good piece of game design, chaps. Don't do this. Because you've got a child who is already very upset because their Nintendo DS has run out of charge and they left their charger at home, or their mother is saying, you've played quite enough for one day, do your homework. And then they're like, oh no, we're going to shout at you for 5 minutes when you do get back online. Don't do that. Yeah. So I don't think it's possible to really think seriously about the impact of New Horizons without taking it in the context of the pandemic. It's one of I think it may be the most successful video game ever made. It really pitched in at a point where people just needed something, and the thing they needed was to hang around an island with people. So
yeah, it's communal, it's not, it's very non-violent, non-threatening, very straightforward and simple, and that's, that was really powerful at that point in time.
Do you want to say something about Spiritfarer, John? Because I think you played it and loved it even before it was on the ballot.
No, not before it was on the ballot. I bought it when it was when it was finalisted, because I was not aware that the lady doing the Hugo voter packet would be some sort of force of nature who would get 2 of the games in it. I don't think anyone saw that coming. But yeah, no, it's not. It's good. It's very much a game that does not care how often you play it. Like I've played, like, I remember, so an example, Legend of Zelda being an example. This is Alison's virtual background is now Alison with her many turnips. So I find that sometimes, like with games like Zelda or Horizon Zero Dawn, if you go away for 8 months and then come back, you've forgotten all the buttons, you don't really know what you're doing. What are the quests I'm doing? Oh God. Spiritfarer doesn't really have that because it's not that complicated. And it's kind of a mashup of a very chilled out platformer and a time management game with a fishing mini game and animals who like hugs. But with a lot of thinking about death in the mix as well. I really enjoy it. It's really contemplative, and like I kind of like it in a kind of chilled out. I will play half an hour before bed, and I will feel nice. I confess it does not make me excited to keep playing in the same way that like a game like Zelda or Horizon Zero Dawn did, where it's like I'm thinking about like the puzzle I'm doing or like the plot I'm on. Like it doesn't really have that hook for me. But it is kind of just a super nice game that you can play in 30-minute bursts on your Switch, which I do enjoy. I don't think it will be. I suspect it won't win, and I suspect I will prefer Hades, which I have but have not played yet. I don't know if have either of you played Spiritfarers?
I probably will, but I haven't.
Right, so do hit me up if you're a Discord 3 member. Do hit me up for a free code. But I don't have Switch codes, and I think I might like it better on the Switch. I've only played it for about an hour so far, partly because I was in the middle of running a convention and sorting out the Hugo voter packet when somebody offered me a free code.
Be honest, it's because you've been playing Hades all the time, Alison.
But okay, so moving on to the 6th of the 6 games, which I did leave to last because oh my god. So if I were ranking games by how much I played them. It would be Hades, Animal Crossing, Blazeball, Spiritfarer, and the other two which I haven't played. But I don't think that is the right way to rank them, and we'll get onto that in a bit. But oh my God, I have played about 210 hours of Hades, which is a lot. And that's all in quite a short period, which is also a lot. Hades is a roguelite. So you basically do the same thing over and over again, but you gradually have meta progression in there. So it's not quite as soul-sucking as a true roguelike, which I also very much like, I should say. So it was a kind of so my son said to me as soon as it came out, "Oh my God, Mum, this is an isometric roguelike with meta progression. You will love it. It will suck your life, and it will be the best thing you've ever done." And I was like, I am never playing that game. And then it got nominated for the Hugo finalist ballot. I was like, obviously it is my moral duty to play that game, and 210 hours later. It is fantastic, and it's also narratively excellent. So if we're interested in emerging narrative in games, Hades does something that nobody has ever done before, which is that they sat down and said, imagine if for every possible interaction between you and any of the characters, or any two of the characters, we wrote threads of narrative that were funny and then were delivered sardonically by clever people. 315,000 words of voice acted contextual thing. So for example, if you turn the speed running timer on, the guy who likes speed runs says, "Oh, I see you've done that." And if you turn it off again, he goes, "Oh, a bit much for you, was it?" And you know, there's thousands and thousands of interactions like this in the game. So it is incredibly, it basically doles out its rewards by being funny, and the gameplay is good, and all the character. I will put my thing back on. Apparently, one of the reasons that many people like it, and this is not something I look for in video games, but there we are, is that all the characters are super hot. But people say this. Well,
that's because they're in. That's because they're in hell.
Yeah, no. Okay, so what it actually is that when they said, "Why are all your characters super hot?" they were like, "Our art director was inspired by classical Greek architecture, and what you think of as super hot is what the Greeks like to draw and paint and sculpt, and that is why all of our characters are super hot. It's not an accident." So anyway, so yeah, Hades. It both works as a game, and it also is narratively interesting, and it also has, I think, at least as much to say about death as Spiritfarer does, probably, but it doesn't kind of knock you over the head with it quite so much.
Very quickly, Spiritfarer has a free demo on Steam that says Ruth. Sorry.
But also
that's good to know.
Yeah, join the Worldcon.
So regarding Hades, it was in, I've forgotten the word. It was in pre-release. I can't remember what it's called. For
2 years, forever.
And one of the things that's very notable, and one of the aspects of the game that it's shown how to do this properly, in that it had parts of the game and it really listened to feedback. And one of the reasons the final release version is so good is because they had thousands of testers playing it and giving them feedback over an extended period of time. So they built something incredibly solid, and that meant because they were doing that, they had the money to build something incredibly solid, and so much more than they could have anticipated. And so it's one I had heard about a lot over a long period of time. I'm not really into fighty, especially like quick, twitchy games.
Which it is, incidentally.
Yeah.
I have learned twitchy gameplay in the last 205 hours. It has taught me a new skill that I expect to be useful in the future.
Yeah, and I have God mode on, and what God mode does is every time you die, you get another 2% damage resistance. Annoyingly, you can't sort of pause and say, I would like to stay at this much damage resistance. You can either have it goes up to 80% and then stops, or nothing. I haven't braved turning it off again to see how much I actually have improved. I think I probably could at this point. And I enjoyed it, but I was sort of playing a bit not every day, and I wasn't really hooked. And I sort of felt like, oh, and there were some story things I wanted. I was like, I'm interested in where that's going. And then for some reason, when I, did a successful run for the first time, actually, it hooked me in a different way. And since then, I played a lot more. I have one thing to get towards the last. There are, goals for you to achieve. There's only one goal left for me to achieve that I've only got one part of that to do. I've romanced all the people. And it's, it's very interesting. And I actually found that I do enjoy those fights now and enjoy thinking about how best to do it, what my loadout's going to be, and also just find the different stories and how they connect. And so if you do something for one person, someone else might say, oh, you did that. If you're romancing people, the other people you're romancing will know about it. It's not just all happening individual bubbles with each character. It's an overall narrative.
Yeah, the narrative's phenomenal. Somebody has said in comments, Ruth has said, I've heard the asexual rep in Hades is pretty good. So these are Greek gods. You are playing as Zagreus, who is the son of Hades, the god of the underworld, and he's trying. His dad's a dick. His dad is not going to win Father of the Year contest, and the plot of the game is that you are trying to escape Hades and have a new life with your Olympian god relatives and friends, and because you're immortal, that actually provides, they were like, how can we have a justification for people keeping turning up again after they die? Ha! If you're immortal, that'll be that. There are many characters, and the characters reflect a wide range of sexualities. They all I think have quite a Greek god attitude to sexuality, which they all do quite a lot of it.
There's one.
There is an asexual character, but I don't know if there's an aromantic relationship. We don't know whether that character is asexual generally. We just know that in this particular case, that's not what they're after.
They say she says things that indicate it's not just that particular case, that she is generally aromantic. It's implied also asexual, but that's less clear. It has a reasonable sort of polyamory, although it sort of presents it as, oh, well, Greek gods do things differently to the mortals. So it's sort of like, yes, positive polyamory, but it's presented as a thing that the gods do that's different for, mortals wouldn't do it, which is...
but remember, these are Greek mortals, so they also spend some time going, machine gun, that's really interesting, isn't it?
But yeah, it has some decent things, and I've seen a lot of polyamorous people who do really like the way it's done in that.
There's a non-binary character. It's quite good that way. There are so many things that are good about this. So I shouldn't just say we have. I'm also going to pick up John's comment in chat, which is a Back to Spiritfarer, a cozy management game about dying, which is, I think, 100% correct.
So you got people on a boat, and those people want to be happy enough that they can die better. They're already dead, but they want to die again or some more. And if you hug them and give them the food they like and go on quests to find that they had a bad relationship with their mother, eventually that will happen.
Oh, that sounds, for some reason that description appealed to me a lot more than what I've previously heard.
Yes, I think Spiritfarer's not done the best job of bringing up what it's like, because I thought I would really like it.
It's really hard to describe. It is. And I will say, so we've only got 10 minutes left, so I do just want to say something kind of about the breadth of the category generally, which is, I think one of the things, this category in its first year is already more varied and vibrant than many other categories that have been going for many years in the Hugos. And so I think that You've got like a game which is very linear and very cinematic. You've got another game which is quite linear and cinematic, but it's a JRPG. You've got a cutesy game about animals and islands. You've got a management game about dying that's a bit weird. You've got Hades,
Really
which is all about being Greek and angry and dead and doing it lots. And then you've got Blaze Ball, which is not any of those things, and then some.
And all of them.
Yes.
Yeah,
and it's like,
imagine fantasy football if you could arrange for your characters to explode.
Yeah, like this is the thing.
You know?
So it's
you're betting on a game, but you need to consider the fact that a black hole might take all the players away at any given moment.
Yeah.
So it's a fantastic category. I think we're all agreed. Fantastic category. Want there to be best video game. It is the biggest entertainment product. A huge proportion of gaming is genre, and we should absolutely have a best game Hugo in some form, and we should really work for that. What would your votes be, chaps? Because we do have about 2 minutes.
I'll say, it's been clear, but the big downside to this is that it's a lot harder for people to access the entirety of the category than it is with books and other things, because you need multiple platforms.
So I agree, and I think I know exactly,
Twitch.
And I think you're right. But I will say that one of the nominees is a 12 novel series that also has 40 short stories. So I'm not sure. And like another of the nominees, like when the Wheel of Time was nominated, like if you want to watch the Expanse episode that's been nominated, you have to watch 5 seasons of the Expanse, which is 50 hours.
Yeah.
So and you've got to have like all the different streaming service subscriptions if you're like watching the best track presentation short form. So it's a good point, and I think it is probably still true that this category is the least accessible from that perspective. But at the same time, it is. I think that I wonder whether the Hugos have been headed that way for a while. Graphic stories.
Hades will be my number one on my ballot if and when I bother to get a DisCon membership so I can vote.
I think Hades. Oh, sorry. I suspect Hades will be mine as well. I haven't played it. It just looks like it's going to be my cup of tea.
I don't like it.
I might not like it. I will probably, at the moment, I'll put Spiritfarer above Blaze Ball. So, and I suspect, given what I know about the games, my ballot will end up being Hades, Spiritfarer, Blaze Ball, Final Fantasy VII Remake, The Last of Us 2.
Ooh. Those fighting words. And Animal Crossing below no award.
Oh, well, I don't think I will have been able to play that. So I suspect it won't go on my ballot. But I'm not averse to playing The Last of Us Part 2. And Final Fantasy VII has a demo. So
Ruth has voted in the chat for, I would say, Final Fantasy VII Remake. So Ruth, you should have been on this panel.
Definitely,
we did invite people on earlier. We could definitely put you on. And I am obviously Hades is going to get my vote unless something bizarre happens between now and then, which it won't, I don't think, because I think it does. But you mustn't think that the 205 hours have anything to do with the narrative, with the science fiction or genre elements. I think that's one of the things that worries me about games is that it's not obvious that the genre content is what drives the ongoing gameplay. It's certainly true if your idea of a game is watching a narrative movie in which you occasionally get to click, then yeah, absolutely those things are genre, but the actual genre content is the side. But Hades does both things. It forces you to push on because you really want to find out how the narrative plays out, and in order to find out how the narrative turns out, you have to learn about how to build RPG builds in the roguelike context. So that is quite a clever trick.
And it does use genre things to make an in-narrative reason for the roguelike structure, which is unusual in roguelikes. And
I'm unique.
So,
I think unique. I don't think I've ever
I
don't
don't
think
know if
there's
it is
a few
unique
things
because I was
I've never
about to
played
cut in and mention Hollow Knight, which I think does
Yeah.
the same thing as a roguelike and uses the mythological aspects to explain why you keep resetting. But I will also, I just wanted to ask you both before we wrap up. So these are the things we're going to vote for. What do we think is going to win? Do we think we are representative, or do we reckon Animal Crossing will definitely stop?
Hades topped so many Game of the Year lists. So it will be interesting because I feel like I don't have an amazing handle on the Hugo voting community in this case, but I would probably bet on Hades.
Yeah, I think the fact that Hades has won a couple of Game of the Year awards and has now just won the Nebula, which is for people who don't know, the Nebula's had an award for a while. I think some of the companies that I spoke to as part of the voter packet were like, oh, they didn't really have, they had trouble realizing that this wasn't another award for game narrative. Because Hades, the Nebula has an award specifically for game narrative and for writing in video games, and Greg of Supergiant has just picked that up. Maggie would vote for The Last of Us Part 2. You should probably also have been on this panel, Maggie. But apparently is an anomaly. I
don't know.
Really
like,
it was very popular.
When
it was very popular.
And it got on the, it is a finalist. So there is an element, like, obviously that if all of these games are games in with a shout, because they do all clearly have a lot of respect from the fandom. And I think, you know, it sounds trite, but it's an honor just to be nominated. As someone who has lost to Hugo, been finalisted 3 times. It really is like, it is good just to be on the list. I think
it's absolutely an honor to be a Hugo finalist. When I was a Hugo finalist, we were just nominated. But it's better to win. I would just like to say.
Right.
Anyway, so yeah.
Just in case anyone was wondering about how the Hugos work.
Hades, I think. Place ball.
I'm on another panel
second place.
4 minutes.
We are running away now, so we have to stop. But
Yeah.
we can have an ongoing discussion in here if people are interested for a little while. But we are done. Thank you very much to my panelists, and we'll stop recording soon. Thank you very much to the helpful audience who should have been on the panel.
And feel free to continue talking about it in the Discord channel for this item as well. Hurrah!
We can stay here for a bit, though. I might go and eat cake. I believe cake is in my diary.
I'm gonna go.
I'm
and
wondering
talk about
whether I can
regional
persuade
games.
Hispania to give me another bit of cake so I can have cake at the cake. It was very good cake.
Is Hispania rationing your cake?
Well, it does have, so I don't know, it's got 500 milliliters of cream in it, this cake.
It's time to stop the recording, Laurie. We are done. Vote for the